Hey man, there's a quiet revolution happening right now, and most people aren't even paying attention to it. It's not being led by politicians, it's not being blasted across news headlines, and it's not being celebrated in any mainstream conversation, but it's real and it's growing. More and more men, from all walks of life, are making a conscious decision to walk away from women. Not in bitterness, not in hatred, but in clarity. For years, men have been told they were the problem. Told to try harder, to communicate more, to be more vulnerable, to provide more, to tolerate more, only to be rewarded with less respect, less loyalty, and less appreciation. And eventually, something in a man snaps, not in anger, but in awareness. He looks at the years he spent giving and sees how little he's gotten back in return. He starts to realize that maybe the problem isn't that he hasn't given enough. Maybe the problem is that he's been giving to the wrong system entirely. For decades, society has been conditioning men to view women as the central focus of their lives. Movies, songs, advertisements, everything tells you that your worth as a man is tied to your ability to attract, please, and keep a woman. But in reality, this belief has created an endless cycle where men pour themselves out, chasing an ideal that no longer exists. Modern dating isn't about building a family. It isn't about growing together. It isn't even about mutual respect anymore. It's about leverage, validation, and keeping options open. And once a man truly sees that, once he truly understands that he's been participating in a game that's been rigged from the start, he stops playing. He chooses himself, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. The biggest misconception is that men walk away because they can't handle strong women, or because they're afraid of commitment. That's the lie society tells to protect the narrative. The truth is much simpler. Men are walking away because they've finally added up the cost and realized it's not worth the return. They've seen too many examples of friends who gave decades of their lives only to be discarded the moment they struggled. They've seen too many divorces where the man loses his home, his savings, and his kids while being painted as the villain. They've seen too many relationships where love was replaced by entitlement, where gratitude vanished the moment she felt secure. And so they're doing the only thing left that makes sense. They're removing themselves from the equation entirely. What's even more telling is that men aren't walking away in loud protest. They're disappearing in silence. No big announcements, no social media campaigns, no long explanations, just quiet exits. They stop chasing. They stop compromising their values. They stop rearranging their lives to accommodate someone who doesn't truly value them. They start pouring their time, money, and energy into themselves, building businesses, traveling, getting fit, mastering skills, and creating a life that doesn't require romantic validation to feel fulfilling. And the irony? The moment they stop caring about attracting women, they suddenly become more attractive than ever. But by then, they no longer need what's being offered. Women, for the most part, don't see this shift coming until it's already well underway. They've been told for years that men will always chase, always provide, always commit, no matter how they behave. But when the attention starts drying up, when the endless validation they once took for granted begins to vanish, panic sets in. They call men weak for walking away. But deep down, they feel the absence. The truth is, men aren't walking away to punish women. They're walking away because they've realized that their lives are better when they aren't constantly trying to prove themselves to someone who can never be satisfied. They're walking away because they've finally learned that peace is worth more than companionship with the wrong person. The root of this shift goes deeper than just personal experiences. It's a cultural awakening. Men are starting to recognize patterns that used to be invisible to them. They see the way modern dating markets operate like revolving doors, with loyalty treated as optional and commitment treated as a temporary arrangement until someone better comes along. They notice how social media has turned relationships into performances, where attention from strangers is valued more than genuine intimacy with a partner. And they realize that no matter how hard they work, no matter how much they achieve, they are always one emotional whim away from being replaced. This awareness changes everything, because once a man sees that stability isn't guaranteed, no matter what he gives, he starts investing in things that can't be taken from him. A big part of why men are leaving is also the erosion of traditional gender dynamics. Men were once respected for their role as protectors and providers. That respect wasn't conditional, it was ingrained. But in today's climate, those same qualities are often dismissed as expected rather than appreciated. And the more men give, the more invisible those contributions become. Women don't even realize how much men silently do until it's gone. The bills paid without question, the little problems solved before they became big, the emotional stability that kept chaos at bay. Men are starting to ask themselves, why am I working this hard to be unnoticed? And when the answer comes back empty, walking away becomes the logical choice. Another reason men are withdrawing is the weaponization of intimacy. Too many men have learned the hard way that the same woman who once looked at them with adoration can turn cold and unrecognizable when she no longer gets what she wants. Affection becomes conditional, respect becomes a bargaining chip, and everything turns into a test. She withholds, she pulls away, she manufactures conflict, not because the relationship is failing, but because she knows you'll scramble to win her back. This constant emotional push and pull drains a man's spirit, and when he finally understands that he's being manipulated, he doesn't just leave her, he leaves the entire game. Financial independence has also been a catalyst for men's exodus from the dating scene, but not in the way people think. Men aren't walking away because they can't afford relationships, they're walking away because they can. They've reached a point where they can fund their own lifestyles, travel where they want, and enjoy their own hobbies without asking for permission or approval. They realize they no longer need to build a life with someone who may end up resenting them for the very success that attracted her in the first place. It's a freeing realization that the best parts of life don't require a romantic partner, and that chasing love out of habit is just a waste of resources. But perhaps the most powerful motivator is this: men have discovered the peace that comes from solitude. When you're constantly in a relationship, you forget what it's like to live without drama, without unspoken resentments, without the constant low-grade tension of trying to keep someone happy who doesn't want to be happy. Alone, a man can breathe, he can focus, he can hear his own thoughts. And as that peace settles in, he starts to guard it like treasure. Suddenly, the idea of giving it up for someone who may turn his life upside down on a whim feels insane, and so he chooses differently, not because he hates women, but because he loves his peace more than he loves the fantasy he was sold. When a man finally steps back from the noise of modern relationships, the first thing he notices is how much energy he used to spend on constant validation. He remembers the late-night arguments over nothing, the silent treatments that dragged on for days, the texts that were read but not replied to, and the endless guessing games over where he stood. Without all of that, his life feels lighter. He realizes that so much of his mental bandwidth had been hijacked by the need to keep someone else emotionally regulated, a job that was never his responsibility in the first place. And as that realization sinks in, he feels an almost physical sense of freedom. His time is now his own. His energy belongs to his ambitions, and his sense of self-worth is no longer chained to someone else's moods. This is where women often misunderstand men's silence. They think a man walking away is about spite or bitterness, but for most men, it's about survival. It's about getting back to a place where their identity isn't defined by how well they can entertain, provide for, or appease someone else. Once a man has been drained dry emotionally, he knows the only way to refill his own cup is to step away entirely. And here's the thing, when he does, he rarely looks back. Because once a man tastes a life without the constant threat of emotional instability, it's not that he doesn't want love, it's that he refuses to accept it at the cost of his peace. Ironically, it's often after he leaves that women realize the full extent of his presence. At first, she might feel relieved or empowered by his absence, believing she's still in control of the situation. But as days turn into weeks and weeks into months, the reality hits. The bills aren't as easy to cover. The small daily problems don't magically solve themselves. The emotional grounding she once felt is gone, replaced by a subtle but persistent anxiety. That's when the truth hits her. His absence is louder than his presence ever was. She didn't notice the silent ways he held her life together until those supports disappeared, and now she's left trying to rebuild something she took for granted. For men, watching that realization happen can be bittersweet. On one hand, it validates everything they felt, the exhaustion, the neglect, the quiet resentment they carried for years. On the other hand, it comes too late to matter. By the time she finally understands what she lost, he's already rebuilt his life in a way that no longer leaves room for her. He's learned new routines, deepened his friendships, and discovered new passions. And in doing so, he's found something she can no longer offer him, a life that feels complete without her in it. What's happening on a larger scale is that men are realizing their worth isn't tied to romantic acceptance. For decades, men were told their value came from being chosen, from being a good man to a woman who would in turn reward him with loyalty and affection. But when men began to see that loyalty was conditional and affection could be withdrawn without warning, they stopped chasing the approval of people who could flip on them at any moment. They started chasing mastery instead, mastery of their craft, their finances, their bodies, and their minds. And in doing so, they became more attractive to the world, even as they became less accessible to women. That's the paradox. The more men walk away, the more magnetic they become, but they no longer care to be caught. The ripple effects of men walking away are already reshaping the dating landscape, and anyone paying attention can feel it. Women are beginning to voice their frustration, not just at the so-called low-quality men, but at the high-value men who used to be eager to commit and now simply won't. The narrative has shifted from all men are trash to where have all the good men gone, and the answer is brutally simple. They're still here, but they've stopped playing a game that was rigged against them from the start. These men haven't disappeared into oblivion. They're in gyms, on trading floors, in workshops, traveling the world, and pouring their energy into pursuits that pay them back tenfold instead of draining them dry. They're no longer interested in competing for affection from someone who thinks his presence is replaceable. When a man realizes that his emotional labor, his resources, and his loyalty are treated as baseline requirements instead of blessings, something inside him switches off. It's not bitterness, it's detachment. And detachment is far more powerful than anger. Anger can still be manipulated, still be poked and prodded until it responds. Detachment, on the other hand, is final. It's the quiet confidence of knowing you can walk away at any moment and not lose sleep over it. That's the kind of strength women test for, but secretly fear. Because they know once you've crossed into that space, there's no getting you back under the same conditions that drove you away. You'll notice that when men step into this mindset, their whole demeanor changes. They speak less, but with more weight. They stop explaining themselves to people who never truly listened in the first place. They stop broadcasting their plans and instead let the results speak for them. This shift is intoxicating not just to women, but to everyone around them because it's rare. In a world where everyone is desperate for validation, the man who needs none stands out like a fire in the dark. That's why, ironically, when men finally stop chasing women, women start chasing them harder than ever. But here's the twist. The men who've tasted freedom are no longer so easily tempted by beauty alone. They've raised their standards to match the value they've built in themselves. From a societal perspective, this shift is rattling long-standing gender dynamics. For generations, the implicit deal was that men would sacrifice themselves for love, family, and stability, and in return, women would offer loyalty, respect, and companionship. But as more men have experienced betrayal, divorce courts, and modern dating's disposability, they've stopped believing that deal exists. And without that belief, they have no reason to play the part. What's replacing it is an era of self-prioritization, where men are no longer ashamed to put themselves first, not out of selfishness, but out of survival. This terrifies the system, because a man who doesn't need validation is a man who can't be controlled through scarcity. This is why, when you look closely, the men walking away are often the most disciplined, capable, and desirable men in the room. They're not the ones sulking in bitterness. They're the ones building empires, sculpting their bodies, traveling, learning, and mastering their emotions. They've learned to be selective, not desperate, and that's the real reason women feel their absence so deeply. Because deep down, every woman knows that once a man like that chooses himself over her, the chapter is closed forever. She may try to circle back months or years later, but she'll find that he's no longer the same man who once waited for her to see his worth. He's evolved into someone who knows exactly what he brings to the table and won't sit at just any table to prove it. What's truly unsettling for many women is that the men walking away are not doing it in protest, they're doing it in peace. This isn't a loud, performative exit filled with threats or ultimatums. It's a quiet, decisive shift where the man simply stops showing up for dynamics that drain him. No long explanations, no begging for understanding, no final dramatic conversation, just absence. And absence is powerful because it leaves a space that can't be filled with another man so easily. This is why many women find themselves thinking about an ex years later, not because he was perfect, but because his absence reminded her of what true masculine stability felt like, something that's increasingly rare in a culture addicted to chaos. You'll notice that when men make this choice, their time horizon changes. They stop thinking in terms of immediate gratification and start building a life that compounds in value over years. The car they buy isn't to impress someone temporarily, it's to reward themselves after months of discipline. The trips they take aren't for social media, they're to expand their mind and perspective. They start investing in things that can't be taken away through manipulation or legal paperwork. In other words, they reclaim the power of permanence in a world obsessed with the temporary. And that makes them untouchable, because a man who controls his own joy can't be baited into losing it. From the outside, it might look like these men have simply given up on love, but in reality, what they've given up on is the illusion of love that requires self-betrayal to sustain. They've stopped signing emotional contracts that only benefit the other party. They've stopped chasing after the dopamine hit of temporary female attention, trading it instead for the deep satisfaction of building something enduring. And here's the paradox. The moment a man truly no longer needs a woman for emotional stability, the quality of the women he attracts skyrockets. Not because he's playing games, but because he's living in such a way that his value is undeniable, even to those who might have once overlooked him. There's a truth. Most men only learn after they've walked away. The greatest revenge is not moving on with someone else. It's moving on with yourself. It's waking up every day in a life you've consciously designed, free from the constant emotional negotiations that once drained you. It's knowing that you can provide for yourself, protect yourself, and inspire yourself without needing external permission. And ironically, it's this self-sufficiency that makes people who once took you for granted suddenly see you as the prize. But by the time they do, the door is no longer open. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. So when you hear people say, men are walking away from women, understand that this is not an attack, it's an awakening. It's a generation of men deciding that their peace, purpose, and power are too valuable to gamble in a marketplace where loyalty has been replaced with convenience. And the most important thing to remember is this: once you've learned to fill your own cup, you'll never again tolerate someone who only comes around to drink from it. Walk away, not to prove a point, but to protect your life. Because in the end, the man who chooses himself doesn't just win, he changes the game entirely.